All right, you guys. It's elevated. All right, let's just jump into it. Part 3, finally. Modern problems require ancient solutions. So this first section, we actually went over it. This first section I'm about to do in this chapter, we actually went over it a little bit in the part 1 towards the end. I think looking at heroism, the initial cope, and then depression, the failures of heroism. I'm actually going to be looking at the same slides just to kind of refresh our memory on that. But yeah, part 2, we kind of looked at all the copes and how all of these different ideas and idols and stuff like that are they're there to kind of mask this denial that we haven't addressed yet, just facing death and what it means for us in terms of our lives and stuff. But yeah, so part 3, modern problems require ancient solutions. So the first section we're going to do today, we're going to look at the modern problems. We're going to get into, I think I'm going to do Rank and Kierkegaard solutions in one video, hopefully, if I can fit it all in one video. And then we're going to finish up with conclusions, both the author's conclusions and my own conclusions. So yeah, this is it. I should have picked a different color for this fucking series other than black, because it has just been an absolute drag on my mentality not being able to finish this series. It is what it is. Modern problems. So yeah, we're going to look at God is Dead and the Myth of Utopia. That second part is going to be kind of towards the end. We're going to take a look at that. But yeah, God is Dead. A lot of people tend to misinterpret that. A lot of New Age atheists would go, haha, yeah, fuck yeah, victory, science has finally taken away the need for God and worship and this and that, when it really hasn't. It's taken away this idea of a transcendent or it's taken away the idea of God in modern parlance. So people aren't comfortable with using that concept as what did we call it? What did we look at it earlier? A transference. It's like the transference to get the willpower and stuff like that to conquer death. I don't know. It is what it is. So yeah. The fact is that this is what society is and always has been. A symbolic action system. A structure of statuses and roles, customs and rules for behavior, designed to serve as a vehicle for earthly heroism. Each script is somewhat unique. Each culture has a different hero system. What the anthropologists call cultural relativity is thus really the relativity of hero systems the world over. But each cultural system is a dramatization of earthly heroics. Each system cuts out roles for performances of various degrees of heroism, from the high heroism of a Churchill, a Mao, or a Buddha, to the low heroism of the coal miner, the peasant, the simple priest. The plain, everyday, earthly heroism wrought by gnarled working hands guiding a family through hunger and disease. So yeah, this is, like I said, we already looked at this, but basically that's what quote-unquote civilization or society does, is just gives you roles to play out to fulfill this need for having a meaningful life, and enough so to be able to face death with some measure of readiness, I guess. So yeah, society itself is a codified hero system, which means that society everywhere is a living myth of the significance of human life, a defiant creation of meaning. Every society thus is a religion, whether it thinks so or not. Soviet religion and Maoist religion are as truly religious as our scientific and consumer religion, no matter how much they may try to disguise themselves by omitting religious and spiritual ideas from their lives. So examples of this, when you're looking at scientism, and I don't know why it's such a hard concept for people to wrap their heads around. Basically, science has a certain level of efficacy of like what it can and cannot do and what it's capable of proving or not proving or whatever. So scientism is elevating that, or like just having a misconception about it, thinking science is more powerful than it really is. So people do that all the time. Another common one is like the free market, and how it's like, oh, it's like magically gonna work itself out because it's the free market. That's just how it works, when it's like we don't really have any evidence for that, or for assuming that we don't really have any evidence to really do that. What are some other ones? I think those are the two most common ones, most prominent ones. But yeah, as much as they want to say, we believe in science, or no, we don't. We trust in science. We don't believe in anything. We don't have faith, or we don't idolize or worship or this or that. When you take a look at like how they treat like celebrities, I'm pretty sure I've talked shit about them before, like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye or people like this, like they really do like idolize and worship them as like paragons of whatever. So yeah, this whole idea of like God is dead, like it's like there's still that need to like mooch off of some sort of like, whether it be a celebrity or a deity or something like that, or like a fantastical concept like the free market, quote unquote, or science. Like we're still needing that. We still need a God, basically, whether we find it in an actual God or in a false idol. Oh my gosh, that's funny. I'm like so conflicted. I'm like sounding like a quote unquote true Christian, but at the same time, like there's a lot of shit in there that is true, but whatever. It doesn't matter whether the cultural hero system is frankly magical, religious, and primitive, or secular, scientific, and civilized. It is still a mythical hero system in which people serve in order to earn a feeling of primary value, of cosmic specialness, of ultimate usefulness to creation, of unshakable meaning. They earn this feeling by carving out a place in nature, by building an edifice that reflects human value, a temple, a cathedral, a totem pole, a skyscraper, a family that spans 3 generations. The hope and belief is that the things that man creates in society are of lasting worth and meaning, that they outlive or outshine death and decay, that man and his products count. When Norman O'Brien said that Western society since Newton, no matter how scientific or secular it claims to be, is still as religious as any other, this is what he meant. Civilized society is a hopeful belief and protest that science, money, and goods make man count for more than any other animal. In this sense, everything that man does is religious and heroic, and yet in danger of being fictitious and fallible. Yeah, I was going to kind of mention that, but he did kind of just sum it up as well. So like, when you talk to people who are into scientism or just like these anti-religious people who think they're not whatever, when you talk to these people and you ask them like, okay, then what's the point of life or this or that, or they'll say something like, oh, it has no meaning, there is no point, but science is important. And it's like, but why though, if like you can't reconcile those two things? Or they'll try to say it does have meaning, that like science and the search for truth is is an important meaning of itself. Which is like, it's still like it's not like they think it's sufficient enough, but it's not sufficient enough to overcome death, because in the end, like, we're all gonna die and decay anyways. Like the entire universe is gonna experience what do they call that, like a heat death or whatever, where everything just fizzles out anyways. So it's like, does it really give it meaning, or is it just something you're trying to reconcile that's irreconcilable under that framework? Like under the framework of like a godless, purely material realm. It's like, and then and then like the typical thing that they'll say is like, oh, it doesn't have to have meaning, or it doesn't have to have purpose, or something like that. But then, like, what's the point of arguing against someone who argues for purpose? I don't know. Like, it's just very, whatever. The crisis of modern society is precisely that the youth no longer feel heroic in the plan for action that their culture has set up. They don't believe it is empirically true to the problems of their lives and times. We are living a crisis of heroism that reaches into every aspect of our social life. The dropouts of university heroism, of business and career heroism, of political action heroism. The rise of anti-heroes, those who would be heroic each in his own way, or like Charles Manson with his special family, those whose tormented heroics lash out at the system that itself has ceased to represent agreed heroism. The great perplexity of our time, the churning of our age, is that the youth have sensed, for better or for worse, a great social historical truth, that just as there are useless self-sacrifices in unjust wars, so too is there an ignoble heroics of whole societies. Now, this was written in the 70s. I think it was written in the 70s. I'm like pretty sure. So yeah, it was obviously a different time. But a lot of it still reflects in our age too. There's that quote. I don't think I've said it before on this channel. History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. I don't know where I heard that from. But yeah. Like, it's let me see if the next slide has it. No, so yeah, I'll just say it right here. It's like the whole, like 2014, 2015, dude, a lot of people were unplugging or whatever. Like just not giving a fuck. And then, anti-PC culture. Like it became more of a cultural, like the cultural effect of the anti-PC crowd complaining about the PC crowd had a bigger, like, made the whole thing progress further than just the PC crowd pushing its own thing. Like, it was the reaction that brought about its snowball. If that makes sense. I don't know. But, like, people saw this. People were not feeling like it was the same crisis of heroism that he stated right here, where people did not give a fuck anymore, and they were checking out. And then what did they do to bring everybody right back into the mix? And they brought it President Mr. T. For the 2016 through 2020, and riled everyone right back up, got them hooked right back onto the screen and everything. Like, that's just, it's just one of the easiest ways to give someone a cheap sense of heroism, or like just a cheap opportunity for heroism, is just give them an enemy to fight. Like, it's so simple and it's so easy, and people fall for it every fucking time. Like, it's it's ridiculous at this point. But yeah, man needs a second world, a world of humanly created meaning, a new reality that he can live, dramatize, nourish himself in. Illusion means creative play at its highest level. And I think I mentioned that Diane Ackerman book, I think. Deep Play. Definitely recommend. I started reading it again, and I think it was one of those things where it read a lot better when I was younger and didn't know as much. But it could help if you've never looked into that shit before. I just think it's very elementary at this point, but whatever. But yeah, that creative play, it's the same play that people do, whether it's arguing about politics or finding enemies to argue against about politics, or even I overdo it a lot, but sports too. People do the same thing there. It's just it's creative play. It's at its highest level. It's funny. Cultural illusion is a necessary ideology of self-justification, a heroic dimension that is life itself to the symbolic animal. To lose the security of heroic cultural illusion is to die. That is what deculturation of primitives means and what it does. It kills them or reduces them to the animal level of chronic fighting and fornication. Life becomes possible only in a continual alcoholic stupor. Many of the older American Indians were relieved when the big chiefs in Ottawa and Washington took control and prevented them from warring and feuding. It was a relief from the constant anxiety of death for their loved ones, if not for themselves. But they also knew, with the heavy hearts, that this eclipse of their traditional hero systems at the same time left them as good as dead. Yeah, so this whole, they lived their entire lives in a certain, under certain illusions, and then here comes, Western, civilization coming in and changing that and reducing them. So, they're not, they weren't acclimated to the new system fast enough, and their old system died off too quick. It left them in this limbo of oh, nothing... what's the point of anything type shit. So they essentially just succumb to nihilism, I guess. But yeah, existence is simply too much of a burden. Without some kind of ideology of justification, people naturally bog down and fail. Here again, we can see how correctly Rank emphasized the historical dimension of mental illness. The question is never about nature alone, but also about the social ideologies for the transcendence of nature. If you can't be a hero within a communal ideology, then you must be a nagging, whining failure in your family. From this perspective, the problem of heroism and of mental illness would be who nags whom. Do men harangue the gods, the armies of other nations, the leaders of their own state, or their spouses? The debt of life has to be paid somehow. One has to be a hero in the best and only way that he can, in our impoverished culture even, as Harrington so truly put it. If only for his skill at the pinball machine. And it's just it's become this, it just reeks of desperation at this point, of people just scrambling and trying to do all these things to find something that gives them this meaning or purpose or whatever. And it's social media fucked that up, because you're doing it, you're basing your meaning on external validation, and that shouldn't be it. I can see there being stipulations about that, but yeah, basically for the most part, it's vapid, it's I said, cheap, just these disposable lifestyles, I guess. Disposable in the sense that you can just pick it up and put it down and forget about it. You're just trying to do something that makes you feel important or cool or special or unique, or that you matter in some sense. But yeah. If history is a succession of immortality ideologies, then the problems of men can be read directly against those ideologies. How embracing they are, how convincing, how easy they make it for men to be confident and secure in their personal heroism. What characterizes modern life is a failure of all traditional immortality ideologies to absorb and quicken man's hunger for self-perpetuation and heroism. Neurosis is today a widespread problem because of the disappearance of convincing dramas of heroic apotheosis of man. Let me just repeat that. What characterizes modern life is a failure of all traditional immortality ideologies to absorb and quicken man's hunger for self-perpetuation and heroism. So, like, people just aren't... like, not only are people not given opportunities to do a lot of, like, quote-unquote heroic things, or, like, they don't feel as heroic as they used to, like, they're also, like, not able to whip up the hunger or the appetites to be heroic either. And it just says neurosis is today a widespread problem because of the disappearance of convincing dramas of heroic apotheosis. But like I said, it was so easy for them to whip that in that like, it's funny because, like, in that point, like, you had the freedom, like, you had, like, no restrictions, or you had the least amount of restrictions on you because nothing's working. So you had the freedom to go out and choose your own and, like, build your own apotheosis. But of course, in that drought or in that time, people didn't know what to do. It's basically like that learned helplessness type shit. But yeah, like, it's they gave you something and you bought it hook, line, and sinker. They starved you just to bait the hook. It's pretty funny. Like, it's just like, it's whatever. It begins to look as though modern man cannot find his heroism in everyday life anymore, as men did in traditional societies just by doing their daily duty of raising children, working, and worshiping. He needs revolutions and wars and continuing revolutions to last when the revolutions and wars end. Is it any wonder why, like, both sides of the aisle protested for, like, the past couple of years? Like, like, they need to feed off, like, it's whatever. Conflict is the cheapest and most like, it's just it's whatever. That is the price modern man pays for the eclipse of the sacred dimension, aka this is the price modern man pays. For declaring that God is dead. The eclipse of the sacred dimension. When he dethroned the ideas of soul and God, he was thrown back hopelessly on his own resources, on himself and those few around him. Even lovers and families trap and disillusion us because they are not substitutes for absolute transcendence. We might say that they are poor illusions in the sense that we've been discussing. Rank saw that this hyper-self-consciousness had left modern man to his own resources, and he called him aptly psychological man. It is a fitting epithet in more than one sense. Modern man became psychological because he became isolated from protective collective ideologies. He had to justify himself from within himself. But he also became psychological because modern thought itself evolved that way when it developed out of religion. The inner life of man had always been portrayed traditionally as the area of the soul. But in the 19th century, scientists wanted to reclaim this last domain of superstition from the church. They wanted to make the inner life of man an area free of mystery and subject to the laws of causality. They gradually abandoned the word soul and began to talk about the self, and to study how it develops in the child's early relationship with his mother. The great miracles of language, thought, and morality could now be studied as social products and not divine interventions. Just repeat that one line again. They wanted to make the inner life of man an area free of mystery and subject to the laws of causality. It was a great breakthrough in science that culminated only with the work of Freud, but it was Rank who saw that this scientific victory raised more problems than it solved. Science thought that it had gotten rid forever of the problems of the soul by making the inner world the subject of scientific analysis. But few wanted to admit that this work still left the soul perfectly intact as a word to explain the inner energy of organisms, the mystery of creation and sustenance of living matter. It really doesn't matter if we discover that man's inner precepts about himself and his worlds, his very self-consciousness in language, art, laughter, and tears are all socially built into him. We still haven't explained the inner forces of evolution that have led to the development of an animal capable of self-consciousness, which is what we still must mean by soul. The mystery of the meaning of organismic awareness, of the inner dynamism and pulsations of nature. From this point of view, the hysterical reaction of 19th century believers against Darwin only shows the thinness and unimaginativeness of their faith. They were not open to plain and ordinary awe and wonder. They took life too much for granted, and when Darwin stripped them of their sense of special wondrousness, they felt as good as dead. Excuse me. I don't have any water for this, so this is gonna suck. But yeah. This is kind of concept I could probably do a whole other video on. Just like science and what am I trying to say? Like consciousness or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, I think he explains it better in this slide. Yeah, we'll look at it more. Modern man started looking inward in the 19th century because he hoped to find immortality in a new and secure way. He wanted heroic apotheosis, as did all other historical men, but now there is no one to give it to him except his psychological guru. He created his own impasse. In this sense, as Rank said, with what has to be a touch of ironic humor, psychotherapists are, so to say, the neurotic's product due to his illness. Modern man needs a thou to whom to turn to for spiritual and moral dependence. And as God was in eclipse, the therapist has had to replace him, just as the lover and the parents did. For generations now, the psychoanalysts, not understanding this historical problem, have been trying to figure out why the termination of the transference in therapy is such a devilish problem in many cases. Had they read and understood Rank, they would quickly have seen that the thou of the therapist is the new God who must replace the old collective ideologies of redemption. As the individual cannot serve as God, he must give rise to a truly devilish problem. Modern man is condemned to seek the meaning of his life in psychological introspection, and so his new confessor has to be the supreme authority on introspection, the psychoanalyst. As this is so, the patient's beyond is limited to the analytic couch and the worldview imparted there. The promise of psychology, like all of modern science, was that it would usher in the era of the happiness of man by showing him how things worked, how one thing caused another. Then, when man knew the causes of things, all he had to do was to take possession of the domain of nature, including his own nature, and his happiness would be assured. But now we come up against the fallacy of psychological self-scrutiny that Rank, almost alone among the disciples of Freud, understood. The doctrine of the soul showed man why he was inferior, bad, and guilty, and it gave him the means to get rid of that badness and be happy. Psychology also wanted to show man why he felt this way. The hope was that if he found men's motives and showed to man why he felt guilty and bad, he could then accept himself and be happy. But actually, psychology could only find part of the reason for the feelings of inferiority, badness, and guilt. The part caused by the transference objects, trying to be good for them, fearing leaving them, and the like. But now the points that we are driving at. Early conditioning and conflicts with objects, guilt toward specific persons, and the like are only part of the problem of the person. The causa sui lai is aimed at the whole of nature, not only at the early objects. As the existentialists have put it, psychology found out about neurotic guilt or circumstantial, exaggerated, unscrutinized personal guilts, but it did not have anything to say about real or natural creature guilt. Once again and always, we are back to basic things that we have not shouted loud enough from the rooftops or printed in big enough block letters. Guilt is not a result of infantile fantasy, but of self-conscious adult reality. There is no strength that can overcome guilt unless it be the strength of a god. And there is no way to overcome creature anxiety unless one is a god and not a creature. The child denies the reality of his world as miracle, and as that's all there is to it. Wherever we turn, we meet this basic fact that we must repeat one final time. Guilt is a function of real overwhelmingness, the stark majesty of the objects in the child's world. If we, as adults, are well dulled and armored against all this, we have only to read poets such as Thomas Traherne, Sylvia Plath, or R.L. Stevenson, who haven't blunted their receptors to raw experience. And I think this quote is from Sylvia Plath, I want to say. As I go on in this life, day by day, I become more of a bewildered child. I cannot get used to this world, to procreation, to heredity, to sight, to hearing. The commonest things are a burden. The prim, obliterated, polite surface of life, and the broad body and orgiastic, or monadic foundations, form a spectacle to which no habit reconciles me. I think burden is just an old term for burden. But there are times where I feel this way too, where it's like sometimes like I've said it before, I've had that pure thankfulness for like being able to see, but at other times I'll be like absolutely tired of like the sense the sensory overload of just like seeing all the time. Sometimes I just like want to like shut my, like I would, like people go they go on vows of silence for a while. Like sometimes I just want to go on a vow of like blindness for a while, because it's just so much. But yeah. The whole idea of like psychology supposedly being able to figure out the self as opposed to the soul, like it's ignoring the guilt, and he calls it creature guilt, but really the way I see it is like the best way I can explain it is like you like, apart from like heaven being described as like the kingdom of heaven is within man or whatever, like generally the idea is heaven is a separate place from here. So if we are not in heaven right now, what does that make this place? And what does that make us? And it's like, it's just so obvious. It's fallen angels. So this guilt that he's talking about, I believe, is the pure, like, guilt of having left heaven, basically. So that's why it's so pervasive. That's why it's so universal. That's why it's not just, like he said, not just infantile fantasy or like this or that. It's like just the the unbearable burden of being. Yeah. I can't believe I just said all that. Whatever. Moving on. Psychology narrows the cause for personal unhappiness down to the person himself, and then he is stuck with himself. But we know that the universal and general cause for personal badness, guilt, and inferiority is the natural world and the person's relationship to it as a symbolic animal who must find a secure place in it. All the analysis in the world doesn't allow the person to find out who he is and why he is here on earth, why he has to die, and how he can make his life a triumph. It is when psychology pretends to do this, when it offers itself as a full explanation of human unhappiness, that it becomes a fraud that makes the situation of modern man an impasse from which he cannot escape. Or, put another way, psychology has limited its understanding of human unhappiness to the personal life history of the individual and has not understood how much individual unhappiness is itself a historical problem in the larger sense, a problem of the eclipse of secure communal ideologies of redemption. Yeah. Man lives his contradictions for better or worse in some kind of cultural project in a given historical period. Neurosis is another word for the total problem of the human condition. It becomes a clinical word when the individual bogs down in the face of the problem, when his heroism is in doubt or becomes self-defeating. So, like, neurosis is pervasive. It's it's the total problem of the human condition. And it only becomes a clinical word when people begin to stumble and fail and drown in the problem, when their heroism is in doubt or becomes self-defeating. Men are naturally neurotic and always have been, but at some times they have it easier than at others to mask their true condition. Men avoid clinical neurosis when they can trustingly live their heroism in some kind of self-transcending drama. Modern man lives his contradictions for the worse, because the modern condition is one in which convincing dramas of heroic apotheosis, of creative play, or of cultural illusion are in eclipse. There is no embracing worldview for the neurotic to depend on or merge with to mask his problems. And so the cure for neurosis is difficult in our time. Yeah, it really... a lot of people just would rather be spoon-fed their apotheosis or whatever, as opposed to like actually stepping out and stepping forth and doing it yourself. Which is like people talk about like how bad these times are, but it's like it's the best opportunity to go out and go against, to quote unquote go against society, because society isn't or it wasn't anyways. It goes through these cycles, these waves. But like, yeah, that's the best time to go out and forge your own path, when none of the other paths are working, and everyone else is drowning in their own self-defeat. But yeah, it's just people find comfort in the group, and they'd rather do it's hard to believe in God when you see your church numbers dwindling. And it's in that same way, it's hard to it's just hard. It's just, that's basically all it is. The psychotherapists are caught up in contemporary culture and are forced to be a part of it. Commercial industrialism promised Western man a paradise on earth, described it in great detail by the Hollywood myth, that replaced the paradise in heaven of the Christian myth. Let me repeat that. Oh, that's so good. Commercial industrialism promised Western man a paradise on earth, described it in great detail by the Hollywood myth, that replaced the paradise in heaven of the Christian myth. And now psychology must replace them both with the myth of paradise through self-knowledge. This is the promise of psychology, and for the most part the psychotherapists are obliged to live it and embody it. But it was Rank who saw how false this claim is. Psychology as self-knowledge is self-deception, he said, because it does not give what men want, which is immortality. When the patient emerges from his protective cocoon, he gives up the reflexive immortality ideology that he has lived under, both in its personal parental form, living in the protective powers of the parents or their surrogates, and in its cultural causa sui form, living by the opinions of others and in the symbolic role dramatization of the society. What new immortality ideology can the self-knowledge of psychotherapy provide to replace this? Obviously none from psychology. Unless, said Rank, psychology itself becomes a new belief system. Okay, yeah, so this is really the crux of his argument, talking about how psychotherapy just is not sufficient enough to do this. It's one thing to say, hey, you're sick, another thing entirely to cure that sickness. Right? But yeah. But this brings up the second great problem raised by the therapeutic revolution. Even with numerous groups of really liberated people, at their best, we can't imagine that the world will be any pleasanter or less tragic a place. It may even be worse in still unknown ways. As Tillich warned us, new being, under the conditions and limitations of existence, will only bring into play new and sharper paradoxes, new tensions, and more painful disharmonies, a more intense demonism. Reality is remorseless because gods do not walk upon the earth. And if men could become noble repositories of great gulfs of non-being, they would have even less peace than we oblivious and driven madmen have today. Besides, can any ideal of therapeutic revolution touch the vast masses of this globe, the modern mechanical men in Russia, the near billion sheep-like followers in China, the brutalized and ignorant populations of almost every continent? When one lives in the liberation atmosphere of Berkeley, California, or in the intoxications of small doses of unconstriction in a therapeutic group in one's hometown, one is living in a hothouse atmosphere that shuts out the reality of the rest of the planet, the way things really are in this world. It is this therapeutic megalomania that must quickly be seen through if we are not to be perfect fools. The empirical facts of the world will not fade away because one has analyzed his Oedipus complex, as Freud so well knew, or because one can make love with tenderness, as so many now believe. Forget it. In this sense, it is Freud's somber pessimism, especially of his later writings, such as Civilization and Its Discontents, that keeps him so contemporary. Men are doomed to live in an overwhelmingly tragic and demonic world. Just back up. So the first part where they said, even if psychology can, quote unquote, liberate people or quote unquote cure their neurosis, it doesn't necessarily mean like society isn't naturally going to be better, because it's like psychology isn't going to have the answer or the be able to provide that perfect demarcation between like individual selfishness versus like societal duty. What am I trying to say? So it's like if psychology could, quote unquote, cure neurosis, it's like you'll have some people who are openly like purely selfish and self-aggrandizing and this and that, and you'll have other people who are purely like societally driven or whatever. Where it's just gonna cause like these disharmonies and tensions and whatnot. Like some people need to repress aspects of themselves. Yeah. And then the second part of this is where he says, can any ideal of therapeutic revolution touch the vast masses of this globe? It's like when you're doing therapy in like a closed environment, or when you're studying this, like, or even like within a certain town or city like Boston or Berkeley or any of these places where they do like this sort of research, it's like, are you ever going to come up with a universal therapeutic model that'll address like all types of psychologies in all different like civilizations and ideologies and worldviews? Like, no, it's not. It's not feasible in any way. And even if it was, like he says, like the first part, like if we could unrepress or like neuroticize people. So stupid of a word. Like even if we could do that, like it's not it's doesn't mean that people will get better. Like, I don't know. I think that's the thing about like Western psychotherapy, is it's like emphasis is placed on making the individual feel better, right? Not like making the individual, like I hear more about like therapy being like having the individual, I don't know. Like it's like, how many times are you going to go into therapy and the therapist is going to be like, well, you should really give back to your community or something like that. Like trying to foster like those types of thoughts. Like it's very, I don't know. Like it's not, I don't know. But the dedicated social revolutionary who wants a new world and a new man more than anything else can't accept the reality that he himself sees. He still believes in the possibility of some kind of final liberation, which also rings like the hollow passing thought that it is. Marcuse even turns his back wholly on living experience and gets carried away by his abstractions. Men can die without anxiety if they know that what they love is protected from misery and oblivion by the new utopian society. As if men could ever know that. As if you and I can be sure that in any instant that our children will not be obliterated by a senseless accident, or that the whole planet will not be smashed by a gigantic meteor. So he kind of flips. So we were talking about like psychotherapists and like them trying to be like the paragons of this new like just trying to take the reins. Like they just like I said earlier with like scientism, where they're just like blindly, oh, let's just blindly churn science out to examine everything. It's like the psychotherapists are doing the same thing. Oh, let's just go out and blindly like de-neuroticize everyone we can because that'll fix it. And it's like there's no like bird's eye view or like aerial view of their actions. They're just think that their actions are good to begin with. And so he flips and he's talking about like social revolutionaries or just any type of people who like stick to a certain ideology or whatever, and they're like, oh, like if everyone could just like this final liberation, if we could just finally conquer communism and let the whole world run under democracy or freedom or whatever, like it could finally work or whatever. He says it also rings like the hollow passing thought that it is. Just this idea that there could be like a utopian society. Like it's just we're about to rip all of that up. So yeah, the brute fact of death denies once and for all the reality of a non-repressive existence. The prophets of unrepression simply have not understood human nature. They envisage a utopia with perfect freedom from inner constraints and from outer authority. I am thinking here, too, of Alan Harrington's tremendously effective writing on fear of death as the mainspring of human conduct. Like Brown, he pins an entirely fanciful and self-defeating thesis onto the most penetrating and damaging insights. Is fear of death the enemy? Then the cure is obvious. Abolish death. Is this fanciful? No, he answers. Science is working on the problem. Admittedly, we may not be able to abolish death entirely, but we can prolong life to a great extent. Who knows how much eventually? We can envisage a utopia wherein people will have such long lives that the fear of death will drop away, and with it the fiendish drivenness that has haunted man so humiliatingly and destructively all throughout his history and now promises to bring him total self-defeat. Men will then be able to live in an eternal now of pure pleasure and peace, become truly the godlike creatures that they have the potential to be. And this is just trying to do it in like a material sense is so narrow-minded. It's funny. Koran offers like I would put like a stamp of a false stamp of disapproval or whatever, but like he sets this up to like rip it apart. So we'll just keep reading. Koran offers a caution on this vision that goes right to the heart of it and demolishes it. That the postponement of death is not a solution to the problem of the fear of death. There still will remain the fear of dying prematurely. The smallest virus or the stupidest accident would deprive a man not of 90 years, but of 900, and would then be 10 times more absurd. Condorcet's failure to understand psychodynamics was forgivable, but not Harrington's today. If something is 10 times more absurd, it's 10 times more threatening. In other words, death would be hyper-fetishized as a source of danger. And men in the utopia of longevity would be even less expansive and peaceful than they are today. So, yeah. Unless one is talking about real immortality, one is talking merely about an intensification of the character defenses and superstitions of man. Curiously, Harrington himself seems to sense this. when he speculates on what kind of gods the utopians would worship. The children of eternity may worship variations of luck, or that which cannot be controlled. Luck will be the only thing that can kill them, and for this reason they may go down on their knees before it. They may conduct ceremonies before the future equivalent of a giant slot machine or roulette wheel. So yeah, like, some godlike creatures. The fallacy in all this sterile utopianism is that the fear of death is not the only motive of life. Heroic transcendence, victory over evil for mankind as a whole, for unborn generations, consecration of one's existence to higher meanings. These motives are just as vital, and they are what give the human animal his nobility, even in the face of his animal fears. Hedonism is not heroism for most men. The pagans in the ancient world did not realize that, and so lost out to the despicable creed of Judeo-Christianity. Modern men equally do not realize it, and so they sell their souls to consumer capitalism or consumer communism, or replace their souls, as Rank said, with psychology. Psychotherapy is such a growing vogue today because people want to know why they are unhappy in hedonism and look for the faults within themselves. Unrepression has become the only religion after Freud, as Philip Reif so well argued in a recent book. Evidently, he did not realize that his argument was an updating and expansion of exactly what Rank had maintained about the historical role of psychology. Modern man is drinking and drugging himself out of awareness, or he spends his time shopping, which is the same thing. As awareness calls for types of heroic dedication that his culture no longer provides for him, society contrives to help him forget. Or, alternatively, he buries himself in psychology in the belief that awareness all by itself will be some kind of magical cure for his problems. But psychology was born with the breakdown of shared social heroisms. It can only be gone beyond with the creation of new heroisms that are basically matters of belief and will, dedication to a vision. Lifton has recently concluded the same thing, from a conceptual point of view almost identical to Rank's. So let me go back and read that. Psychology was born with the breakdown of shared social heroisms. It can only be gone beyond with the creation of new heroisms that are basically matters of belief and will, dedication to a vision. Excuse me. So yeah. When a thinker of Norman Brown's stature wrote his later book, Love's Body, he was led to take his thought to the same point. He realized that the only way to get beyond the natural contradictions of existence was in the time-worn religious way, to project one's problems onto a God figure, to be healed by an all-embracing and all-justifying beyond. To talk in these terms is not at all the same thing as to talk the language of the psychotherapeutic religionists. Rank was not so naive nor so messianic. He saw that the orientation of man has to be always beyond their bodies, has to be grounded in healthy repressions, and toward explicit immortality ideologies, myths of heroic transcendence. Grounded in healthy repressions. That's something that I don't think he touched upon in this book very much, and I don't think anyone really touches upon. Yeah. Therapeutic religion will never replace traditional religions with the messages of Judaism, most of Christianity, Buddhism, and the like. They have held that man is doomed to his present form, that he can't really evolve any further, that anything he might achieve can only be achieved from within the real nightmare of his loneliness and creation, and from the energies that he now has. He has to adapt and wait. New birth will keep him going, give him constant renewal, says the Christians. And if he has perfect righteousness and faith, and enough of it spread widely enough among his fellows, then, say the Hebrews, God himself will act. Men should wait while using their best intelligence and effort to secure their adaptation and survival. Ideally, they would wait in a condition of openness toward miracle and mystery, in the lived truth of creation, which would make it easier both to survive and to be redeemed, because men would be less driven to undo themselves and would be more like the image that pleases their Creator. All filled creatures trying to live in harmony with the rest of creation. Today we would add, too, that they would be less likely to poison the rest of creation. What did I false set? I think it was for the last line. Men would be less driven to undo themselves. No. Men would be more like the image that pleases their Creator. All filled creatures trying to live in harmony with the rest of creation. Depends on which creator you're talking about, which creation, I guess. Living in harmony. I would say it's more important to live in harmony within yourself than it is to live in harmony with this realm. But yeah. I did underline the lived truth of creation because he kind of breaks it down in this one. What do we mean by the lived truth of creation? We have to mean the world as it appears to men in a condition of relative unrepression. That is, as it would appear to creatures who assess their true puniness in the face of the overwhelmingness and majesty of the universe, of the unspeakable miracle of even the single created object, as it probably appeared to the earliest men on the planet, and to those extra-sensitive types who have filled the roles of shaman, prophet, saint, poet, and artist. What is unique about their perception of reality is that it is alive to the panic inherent in creation. Sylvia Plath somewhere named God King Panic, and Panic is fittingly king of the grotesque. What are we to make of a creation in which the routine activity is for organisms to be tearing others apart with teeth of all types, biting, grinding flesh, plant stalks, bones between molars, pushing the pulp greedily down the gullet with delight, incorporating its essence into one's own organization, and then excreting with foul stench and gases the residue. Everyone reaching out to incorporate others who are edible to him. The mosquitoes bloating themselves on blood, the maggots, the killer bees attacking with a fury and a demonism, sharks continuing to tear and swallow while their own innards are being torn out. Not to mention the daily dismemberment and slaughter in natural accidents of all types. An earthquake buries alive 70,000 bodies in Peru. Automobiles make a pyramid heap of over 50,000 a year in the U.S. alone. A tidal wave washes over 250,000 in the Indian Ocean. Creation is a nightmare spectacular taking place on a planet that has been soaked for hundreds of millions of years in the blood of all its creatures. The soberest conclusion that we could make about what has actually been taking place on the planet for about 3 billion years is that it is being turned into a vast pit of fertilizer. But the sun distracts our attention, always baking the blood dry, making things grow over it, and with its warmth giving the hope that comes with the organism's comfort and expansiveness. Questo sol marde. Not even going to try. I looked it up, the translation. I think it goes, the sun that burns me is the sun that warms my lover or illuminates my lover or something like that. Or maybe it was just not burns, maybe it was just the sun that shines on me or whatever. Yeah, Michelangelo said it. Science and religion merge in a critique of the deadening of perception of this kind of truth. And science betrays us when it is willing to absorb lived truth all into itself. Here, the criticism of all behaviorist psychology, all manipulations of men, and all coercive utopianism comes to rest. These techniques try to make the world other than it is, legislate the grotesque out of it, inaugurate a proper human condition. The psychologist Kenneth Clark, in his recent presidential address to the American Psychological Association, called for a new kind of chemical to deaden man's aggressiveness and so make the world a less dangerous place. The Watsons, the Skinners, the Pavlovians, all have their formulas for smoothing things out. Even Freud, Enlightenment man that he was after all, wanted to see a saner world and seemed willing to absorb lived truth into science if only it were possible. He once mused that in order to really change things by therapy, one would have to get at the masses of men, and that the only way to do this would be to mix the copper of suggestion into the pure gold of psychoanalysis. In other words, to coerce, by transference, a less evil world. But Freud knew better, as he gradually came to see that the evil in the world is not only in the insides of people, but on the outside in nature, which is why he became more realistic and pessimistic in his later work. Yep. The problem with all the scientific manipulators is that somehow they don't take life seriously enough. In this sense, all science is bourgeois, an affair of bureaucrats. I think that taking life seriously means something such as this, that whatever man does on this planet has to be done in the lived truth of the terror of creation, of the grotesque, of the rumble of panic underneath everything. Otherwise, it is false. Whatever is achieved must be achieved from within the subjective energies of creatures, without deadening, with the full exercise of passion, of vision, of pain, of fear, and of sorrow. How do we know, with Rilke, that our part of the meaning of the universe might not be a rhythm in sorrow? Oh, how do we know that our part of the meaning of the universe might not be a rhythm in sorrow? Manipulative utopian science, by deadening human sensitivity, would also deprive men of the heroic in their urge to victory. And we know that in some very important way, this falsifies our struggle by emptying us, by preventing us from incorporating the maximum of experience. It means the end of the distinctively human, or even, we must say, the distinctively organismic. What are you trying to say there? So yeah, this trying to achieve this utopian society is probably going to kill the one thing that really makes us human, or alive even, is what he says, basically. By deadening human sensitivity would also deprive men of the heroic in their urge to victory. He says, in some way, this falsifies our struggle by emptying us and by preventing us from incorporating the maximum of experience. It means the end of the distinctively human, or even, we must say, the distinctively organismic. In the mysterious way in which life is given to us in evolution on this planet, it pushes in the direction of its own expansion. We don't understand it simply because we don't know the purpose of creation. We only feel life straining in ourselves and see it thrashing others about as they devour each other. Life seeks to expand in an unknown direction for unknown reasons. Not even psychology should meddle with this sacrosanct vitality, concluded Rank. I'd have to disagree with him on that. This is the meaning of his option for the irrational as the basis for life. It is an option based on empirical experience. There is a driving force behind a mystery that we cannot understand, and it includes more than reason alone. The urge to cosmic heroism, then, is sacred and mysterious, and not to be neatly ordered and rationalized by science and secularism. Science, after all, is a credo that has attempted to absorb into itself and to deny the fear of life and death. And it is only one more competitor in the spectrum of roles for cosmic heroics. So just keep that in mind, because I think the next slide. Yeah. Oh, come on, don't do this to me. So we looked at life. We looked at like the gnashing. Not only is it like humans have these like desires and evil wills, and I think that comes, and honestly, I think that comes from the biological, the animal, the material. It's not the soul that we have isn't corrupted. It's the avatar that we're in, that whatever. So yeah, we looked at that. We looked at like life as a whole, and even here he admits it devours itself, and it thrashes and writhes, and it pushes in the direction of its own expansion. We only feel life straining in ourselves and see it thrashing others about as they devour each other. Life seeks to expand in an unknown direction for unknown reasons. This, and that. It's a demonic world, as I think Frank or Royd put it earlier. This, and that, right? So this, after all this, this is what he comes to. We can conclude that a project as grand as this, and first off, he assumes the urge to cosmic heroism then is sacred and mysterious and not to be neatly ordered and rationalized. Like, he's saying that because he attributes it to this like this thrashing about of life, or this like mad blind, like just self-expansion. Like he like, this is the problem with materialists and academics, is like they can't delineate the two. So the material, like the urge for cosmic heroism is cosmic. It's spiritual. Like, it's written there in the fucking word. Like, it's your soul is what urges that. It's the material life that blindly thrashes about is what usually operates against cosmic heroism, or like blinds or diffuses the soul into thinking that its expansion is equivalent to the cosmic expansion or cosmic heroism or whatever. So yeah, we can conclude that a project as grand as a scientific mythical construction of victory over human limitation is not something that can be programmed by science. Even more, it comes from the vital energies of masses of men sweating within the nightmare of creation. And it is not even in man's hands to program. Again, disagree with that too. Like, you absolutely can take the reins and do this on your own, but whatever. Who knows what form the forward momentum of life will take in the time ahead, or what use it will make of our anguished searching. The most that any one of us can seem to do is to fashion something, an object or ourselves, and drop it into the confusion, make an offering of it, so to speak, to the life force itself. And that is what I am also stamp of disapproval on that, because that is like like you're deifying this material like life force of like he sits there and it's like, the most that we can do is just make something and give it as an offering to it. Holy fuck, bro. Like, no, that is so... No. I mean, you can. Go ahead. Go right ahead if that's what you fucking want to do. But, like, there's so much more to be done spiritually that just goes against that idea. It's ridiculous. But, yeah. This idea of, like, utopianism being like, oh, let's just take a whole bunch of pills and cut off our aggressiveness, cut off our desire, cut off this and that. It's like, it's You're trying to achieve these things in a material sense that are supposed to be achieved in a spiritual sense. And it's just this like this idea of immortality was never supposed to be for the material body. It's for the soul or the spirit or whatever lies above or in a higher plane than this earthly realm. But people are so like, I mean, it is what it is. That's just the nature of this Alice in Wonderland mad world or whatever you want to call it. But yeah. So that's where we're at right now. People are scrambling. People are disillusioned, but at the same time, like, begging for more illusions or better illusions. People all have these ideas. Oh, if we can just get rid of all the people who think like this, or if we could just get rid of this thought or this, like, like if there was a pill to cure racism, but they would want the government to mandate it. And it's like, it's just not, that's not how this works. Like, this realm is meant to be this mad gnashing, clawing, tearing, and like, it just, like, it's not fertilizer, it's just recycling itself. Like, that's just all it does. Like, there is no purpose to it. There is no purpose to life other than, like, this blind idiot, like, drive, demonic, like, devouring appetite. It is what it is. So yeah, don't fall for the illusions, don't fall for the for the hype. I don't know, man. It is what it is. I think that should be the end of this one. So next time we'll be looking at the solutions. Yeah, sorry these videos take so long. Like I said, it's been dragging like an anchor in my mind, like just being like, like I want to just get up and do it, but it's so hard to actually find the right time and mindset and this and that. It's funny because I would sit there and get ready to do it, and like I'd have to like go do this and that, get washed up or whatever, make sure I have some water, make sure I'm comfortable, and then I'd sit down and then it just wouldn't feel right. And then today I'm just like getting off of work, parked in a parking lot, didn't have any water, didn't do any like pre-reading or planning before this, and just dove right in, and here it is. So yeah, I'm gonna try and finish with these other two, because then I can finally, I might give up. If anybody like specifically asks for me to finish the poetry, like, it's whatever, I don't care. I do have one or two like ones that I do want to make for the channel, but they aren't like my monthly poems. They're actual like separate, like long form traditional poems. But yeah, there are also, I've been having like other ideas of videos that I've been wanting to make, and it's just been like I haven't like made any progress on those because I just gotta finish this shit. It is what it is. I might procrastinate, but I usually get things done over time. So, we'll see. All right. Peace. Later.